If you grew up neglected, hurt by your parents, not heard, not seen, chances are good that when you're under stress, you get emotionally dysregulated. Now, this means your nervous system reacts to stressors with extra strong emotions. When most people would be hurt, you're devastated. When you fall in love, it feels enormous. And getting angry, unfortunately, for the people who love you can turn into rage. Emotional dysregulation is not exclusive to childhood PTSD, but it's a very common and very destructive symptom. And perhaps more than any other trauma symptom, it ruins relationships and kills dreams. But the good news is that healing is possible. My letter today is from a woman I'll call Penny, and she writes, "Hi, Anna. I grew up in an extremely invalidating, abusive, and neglectful household. I've got a pencil. I'm going to circle things I want to come back to, but let's read through Penny's letter and see what's going on." She says, "My parents were alcoholics, divorced 13 years ago, and I suspect my father is a narcissist, and my mother is the definition of a histrionic personality. Every day was full of fighting and threats, and my sister and I often took care of my mother. There were times when we had to force her to eat, help her get dressed, etc., and there were even times we had to hide from my father, staying in hotels and friends' houses and not going to school due to threats. I wanted to write you because I'm in a fairly new relationship. I'm 23, he's 25. We met a year and a half ago online, met in person a little over a year ago, and decided to start dating. The same month we decided to date, I moved in with him. I know that things moved very quickly." Hold on. "I have a history of intensely abusive relationships, and this is the first relationship I've been in that I can say is safe and mostly healthy. I feel like I'm incredibly toxic and hurtful to him when anything happens that I am not ready for, something unexpected or plans changing. I feel neglected or abandoned or invalidated even if my logical mind knows that it's nothing to start a fight over. He's very social and goes on trips with friends. We try our best to have open and healthy conversations, but this can only happen after I've had time and space to calm down. The problem is really when I initially start to feel hurt because I lash out and threaten to leave or tell him that he's not treating me well when that isn't what I want to do, and he has only treated me well. He respects my boundaries, he cares about me deeply, he shows his love, and I feel valued and wanted for the first time in my life. I feel like I'm a terrible person and I'm desperately trying to be good. Usually I blow up before I can think to get space, and that makes a small situation that could have just been me reading into something. It makes it turn into me letting out every negative thing in my head in those moments. I'm blaming him. I feel like I'm pushing him away. There is only so much someone can handle, and I really want to be part of his life and keep him in my life. I realize things moved very quickly, but I think we could have such a beautiful future together if I can get a hold of myself." Wait. "I realize things moved very quickly, but I think we could have such a beautiful future together if I can get a hold of myself. I haven't been in therapy for a year and a half now, and I'm finding it difficult to find a therapist where I am now. I moved across the country. Any advice at all would be so helpful because I feel like I'm ruining our relationship. Thank you." All right. Penny, I got your back. I think I can help. All right. So let's see what we have here. You grew up in an invalidating, abusive, and neglectful household. Parents alcoholic. Your dad, narcissist, mom, definition of histrionic, so that's super emotional. So it sounds like a really hard, horrible situation for a kid. Fighting, threats, had to hide, take care of your mom, over-parentified. Yeah, that'll do it. That'll do it. And so I can just totally understand why you have emotional dysregulation. That is what's going on here, what you're describing. Like you've been able to form a relationship that feels good. He feels like a really good, suitable guy for you. And your emotional dysregulation it just irrationally gets triggered. And you, for the period of time that you're emotionally dysregulated, the feelings are flying out of your head. I've been there. It's horrible. I know. And I promise you, there is a way to heal this. All right. So it's a new relationship, 23, you're 23, he's 25, met a year and a half ago online, then met in person a little over a year ago, and decided to start dating. And that same month you moved in. And I think you said you moved across the country. So if I'm putting this together right, when you decided to start dating him, you not only moved in with him, but you moved across the country. And, you know, like, I totally get how maybe this is going to work out anyway. It can, but that is such a CPTSD move. It's like somebody feels like a great fit and you want to spend more time with them. And if it's cross country that you're long distance dating, it's pretty hard to, you know, go on a second, third, fourth, fifth date. So I see the logic in it, but also I just want to point out, this puts you under a terrible amount of pressure. For a person who has emotional dysregulation, living together is hard. Living together with somebody you haven't had time to like really, really get to know, and you don't have, you know, living together is like a simulation of a committed relationship. There might be monogamy for being that's committed until one of you changes your mind, but I'm just saying, like, living together is it's a strain, and I think it's not for the faint of heart when you don't know somebody, because the pressure is on. You can't get away from that person. A lot of what a person who gets emotionally dysregulated needs, emotionally or neurologically, is they need their own space. They need to pull away. So I like that he goes on trips with friends, that he has his own life. That sounds really healthy. That sounds appropriate. And he's 25. All of that is great. So everything that you're describing here is you get emotionally dysregulated and you've put yourself into the pressure cooker for it. So let's see if we can help you get back out of that. You specifically said that you've been behaving in a toxic and hurtful way. You're worried it's going to drive him away. You don't like it when you're not ready for something, unexpected, or plans change. That's a really typical trigger. And you feel neglected or abandoned or invalidated. Also, very normal trigger for a person who went through what you went through. So a trigger, you know, people say trigger like it just means something that you don't like, but with complex PTSD, it's something that triggers dysregulation. It changes your nervous system, a stimulus. And so it's really normal that when something has a characteristic that you had to cope with as a kid, way over what you were capable of dealing with, that it still is active, like a third rail, you know, it's just, so that feeling abandoned, feeling like things are changing. You do have great conversations, and it works when you've had time and space to calm down. Time and space. That is a great insight, Penny. Time and space. Now, he respects your boundaries. He cares about you. He shows his love. I'm so happy you have that. I'm all for you not messing this up. All right, this is what I'm going to suggest to you. First of all, there's going to be a lot of tools I'm going to suggest to you. I'm going to suggest support. I tell those things to everybody, you know, who's working on healing trauma. But in particular for you, Penny, I think it would be important for you to develop a life outside the couple, outside the home. And if that's not right now living somewhere else, I just really encourage you to find a way to spend time somewhere else. Now, one thing you can do, I know you probably don't have a lot of friends there, right? Maybe you told me that, actually. You haven't been able to find a therapist. So that would be another good thing. You could find a therapist. Everybody needs friends. And when you move, it all becomes about this one person. And so when you're in distress within the relationship, the temptation is enormous to try to, while you're dysregulated, talk it out. But see, when we're talking dysregulated, we're seeing things in a loopy way. We're seeing like, you made me feel like this. You need to fix it. I still feel terrible. I need you to fix it. And that's a terrible and unreasonable demand to put on somebody when we are emotionally dysregulated. They can't actually fix that. There's pretty much nothing they could say. And I know it's better, like, if you're not arguing, it's better. If they're being loving, it's better. But if you have that trauma wound in you, it's going to find its way out no matter how good the relationship is, no matter how much he's careful not to set you off. In fact, you don't want him to have to be careful. You want to learn to calm your triggers. And never fear, like, you can make tremendous progress very quickly if you prioritize this. So the first thing is the tools. I have some very practical tools on how to spot dysregulation, emotional dysregulation, and how to very quickly re-regulate. You use emergency measures. And some of those have to do with like stomping your feet, separating, taking a time out, using physical exercises that cross over the midline of the body. And I'll put a free download at the end of this video that you can access. Anybody watching this can access if you want to see what these are. It's just a series of emergency measures that you can do to re-regulate. But another thing you can do is I teach my daily practice. And this is for all the fearful and resentful thoughts. So if you think about like emotional distress, anything that's negative, we lump it into two just very general buckets, fear and resentment. And I know there's a lot of nuance and shades of color of the emotions in between there, but for this exercise, there's no need to do it. So I teach this exercise for how to release these feelings and then give your brain a rest and recover and come back to center again. And I do this twice a day. I depend on it. It's the whole thing that changed my life. And I'll be sure to put a link to that at the end too. It's always down in the description section. The third thing that you need is support. So that's what I'm saying is, not only do you need to get your life out of the house, but you need the support of people who are walking a path with you, who have a similar approach or mindset about what the problem is and what they're trying to do to heal. And the reason I say that is, if you're struggling with emotional dysregulation and you talk to somebody who's not in any kind of healing for that, and you go, I'm so freaked out, like he didn't understand, he made these plans and I felt so abandoned. A person like a civilian, they're gonna go, oh my God, he abandoned you? That sounds like a terrible guy, you should leave. And they don't understand, and their advice doesn't connect with what we're going through because they don't have that common knowledge about what you're talking about. And over again have I paid the price for, trying to talk about what's distressing me to people who don't walk the path with me. It upsets them, it scares them. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm worried about you, because I get very intense, right, when I'm dysregulated. And I think to an outsider, they would just think, oh my gosh, this woman's falling apart. I'm totally not. I'm just in dysregulation. I'm working my way back out of it, and give me 20 minutes and I'll be good. But if you talk to me when I'm in the middle of it, I sound very, very angry, distressed, probably unreasonable. And so that's one of my boundaries, is I try not to talk when I'm dysregulated, unless there's a very good reason to. I try to re-regulate myself and then talk to those who are essential. So when you're in a conflict or you feel like everything depends on you being able to notice when you're getting dysregulated. There are probably certain thoughts and feelings that come into your mind before you start lashing out. So one for me that I finally learned, like if I'm thinking this thought, stop, leave excuse yourself, say, I'll be back in half an hour. Hold on, I'm like getting dysregulated and I don't want to hurt your feelings. Let me go work this out and I'll come back to the conversation. So for me, some of the cues that's beginning to happen is my nose will feel numb, or I start having the thought, I don't need you, I don't need anybody. Or I have this thought, I have to do everything. Don't you realize you don't do anything? I do everything. That's like the pattern of my trauma-driven thinking. It's probably an emotional flashback. And but whatever it is, wherever it comes from, it's a really unreasonable and harsh thing to like direct at my husband. And it never leads to anything good for me to express this stuff when I'm in the middle of feeling it. And he couldn't do anything about it even if he wanted to. So I take it to my tools. I use my emergency measures. I sit down and I use my daily practice for the writing and meditation techniques. And I come back to self-regulation. And from there, I show up that half an hour later and I go, okay, I think I hear what you're saying. I actually have the capacity to hear what somebody's saying. Now, if you're like me, like a big upset within the relationship, if it's allowed to continue and get really bad, you're going to stay dysregulated a lot longer than half an hour. And that's just a great loss for you and everybody. The world is counting on you. And so, people will say, well, I don't have half an hour. And it's like, well, you're either going to spend a half an hour re-regulating, or you're going to spend half an hour, just continuing down the road of like damaging everything. So sometimes we have to just kind of accept that having CPTSD to the degree that we get emotionally dysregulated, it takes a little time to come back from. And for many years, I had office jobs and I was going through this and I was learning how to self-regulate. And I just sort of found a way to separate myself. People all the time, are detached from their work to deal with a personal call or look at the internet or go have lunch. And I just decided, for me, I'm going to prioritize taking care of my self-regulation, because until I'm regulated, I can't do productive work. I literally can't focus enough to write a paragraph or anything like that. My work, I do the kind of work that usually involves writing most of my life, writing, organizing a project. That's basically what I still do. But I can't do that dysregulated. I will spin all day in like a little circle of starting something and then jumping over to another thing. Like, it looks like ADHD, but it's not ADHD because it just happens sometimes, and then it goes away. I love being regulated. I love having the capacity to control my own thoughts. I can't 100% control my thoughts, but what I experience after I use my techniques is that I have a choice about what I want to think about. Like, I never had that before I learned these techniques. I was basically like chased around by my thoughts all day long. I was exhausted by my own thoughts, my own emotions. And so I can sort of come to a place of neutrality and be able to decide, ooh, I'm going to focus on the list for my friend's party, or ooh, I'm going to lay down, or ooh, I get to do whatever I want with my time now. And that is a tremendous power. That can redirect your whole life, and it can make you the most amazing sweetheart partner because your mind is there. Like, that's what everybody wants. When we say we want to be loved, we mean we want presence in another person. We don't want them to be all about a storm that's going on inside them that we can't influence. We want them present. We want to be interacting. We want to tell them how our day went. We want to hear how their day went. And of course, every relationship is going to have hard days, arguments. That's all normal, but not to the point that a person gets emotionally abusive. And that's basically what happens with CPTSD when it's untreated. So I'm so proud of you. I've been thinking a lot about, empowerment and disempowerment and demoralization and how that happens to CPTSD people. But that little desire, that desire to be better, is such a beautiful part of ourselves. It's the sacred thing. It's why you can heal, because it shows that desire, that knowledge of what is good is intact inside you. And you need some techniques and some habits to start sort of redirecting yourself when your nervous system starts basically just like putting off fireworks. Because that's what nervous systems who have been through trauma do. You can retrain it. It takes practice. It takes courage. It takes being honest with yourself, as you have been. I'm so proud of you. I don't know about you, but people who are very early or haven't really started healing yet, they would experience this whole thing like, he does this to me. Why does he do this to me? But you're just going, wow, I'm getting really dysregulated. And that's how you now have the capacity to change the problem right in your hands. By seeing that. I'm really proud of you. There's this idea out there that to heal from trauma, you need to feel your feelings. And some people will encourage you to feel your feelings and explore your feelings and trust your feelings. But when you have PTSD from childhood, the problem isn't always that you don't feel what you're supposed to feel. More of the time, I think the problem is that you do feel your feelings too much. They get overloaded. And I can show you how to reel that back into a healthy balance. It's called emotional dysregulation. And in my opinion, it can do even more damage than being out of touch with your feelings. Your life can get dominated by your emotions. Are you familiar with that feeling? Your relationships get dominated by your emotions. Your career gets dominated by your emotions. And being so emotional, like having feelings that are inappropriately intense by most people's standards, or when you get emotional at inappropriate times, that's not something where feeling your feelings is the solution. In my view, emotional dysregulation really is kind of like a wrecking ball, or like a tornado that spins around and wrecks everything in its path. Where's it going to go? You don't know. It just sort of comes up out of nowhere and boom, starts destroying things. Sometimes emotional dysregulation goes in the opposite direction, and it just sort of like it's like a light bulb, where all of a sudden it glows really brightly and then goes out. It's dark. There's nothing. You're not feeling anything. Blazing light, nothing. With complex PTSD, what is often a symptom of emotional dysregulation is that flatness after a big outburst. So you might be familiar with some of those patterns. Feelings go out of control. They're coming out in bursts. They're out of proportion to what's going on, or at an inappropriate time, like crying at work or having an angry outburst at your internet provider when you're on a customer service call. And it also refers to going flat emotionally. So it's dysregulated. It's just like not kind of in the middle area that would be appropriate or normal or comfortable for human communication. So big spikes, nothing. But either way, when your feelings are dysregulated, you might say and do things that only overwhelm you further. And then that actually create new traumas that make your situation even harder than it was. So it can be a vicious circle. So one example could be having an argument with your partner. So let's say something makes you angry and they forgot you had friends coming to dinner and you cooked, but your partner arrived an hour late. You didn't know where they were. They never called. And the guests arrived and you didn't have an answer for them. And you called your partner 3 or 4 times and you texted and you called and you were getting more and more frantic. You're in the other room to try to hide how angry you are. And the friends are there. And you're trying to act normal and like everything's fine and it's no big deal that your partner's not there. And then an hour into the dinner, your partner walks in. They totally forgot. And they see everyone and they remember, oh my gosh, they're so sorry. And they're embarrassed. And the guests are like, it's fine, it's fine. And you're like, where were you? And you're trying to act normal. You're trying to keep your emotions kind of in the bandwidth of not totally awful for the guests, but you can't. And so they're ready to sit down now and enjoy the company. But for you, it's too late. That's emotional dysregulation at work. Because old feelings of being ignored and abandoned are just exploding up out of the past. It is an offense that your partner forgot. That's not cool. But the intensity that's coming out of you has more to do with the past. You know it because it's like filling up your chest. It's in your gut. It's in your head. You might start getting a headache. And the guests are there. So don't you hate that? Getting emotionally dysregulated in front of company. It's your reaction to the situation that's now ruining the evening. Has this happened to you? In the moment, it feels like these huge emotions are the only feelings a person could have. And now, later, you're going to have the insight that your reaction was actually too much, that you became the problem person of the evening. But when it's happening, it just feels real. It feels necessary to be that angry, right? It's moments like this when maybe you've said things you didn't mean because now you're not just dealing with disappointment and hurt, but you're believing that nothing's any good because you know what's driving you at that point? Shame. Just the old shame of like that old well of anger and emotion came up and kind of blasted out. There's like this point where, it's feeling really real and you get so mad and then it blasts out of you. And that often sort of triggers you to start recovering and coming back to reality from like, wait, it's not really that bad. So then the shame comes in and you feel worse. Then you might feel a need to check out. You go flat. You can't apologize, everything. Well, this is how friendships fall apart. This kind of thing is how it falls apart. And it's not your fault you got this way. This is a really common and normal response to having grown up with trauma. But of course, we all want to work on it and learn to handle it even better. Even if your partner is used to this kind of behavior and they stick around, this kind of conflict that doesn't feel realistic, that feels overblown, it'll gradually drain away love and trust and close off connection that otherwise would be getting deeper and getting sweeter over time. So that's another way relationships get destroyed. So this is what I mean when I sort of give the side eye to the idea that what we all need is just to feel our feelings, or you just need to grieve, or you just need to get in touch with your anger. Like, that's not always the best advice for everybody. It's not always what's needed. For some people with CPTSD, what's needed is to self-regulate and get more control over emotions and to have some tools in your tool belt to know how to do that on the spot, even before you really know what's going on with you, even before you've been able to process or talk through what happened. Just when you realize like, uh-oh, I'm going over the top, how do you pull yourself back? Because that's how you can make a positive change for the better. Once you can manage that, you start having a huge amount of space where you can talk things out. You can ask questions. You can express yourself and say, you were late for dinner. We had company. I was so embarrassed. You can say that, but you can say that in proportion to, what the problem really is. All right. So I'll show you how to do that. You'll find that if you can control emotions before they get intense, so starting early, you may have this little window of opportunity to do that. You can avoid a lot of problems that come from overreactions and overwhelm, and it's easier to get back to a calm and regulated state then. So I have a friend who visualizes emotional dysregulation as an airplane taking off. You may have heard me talk about that. And regulating her emotions is what she calls keeping the airplane on the ground. And I love that. That is what it feels like. Because, yeah. And so you can think of that too. How are you going to keep your airplane on the ground? Once it takes off, it's just a great big deal. So how are you going to do that? You can do it. You can stay regulated even when you're upset if you understand what's happening and you practice, practice, practice. So when you go into a strong emotional reaction, one is notice it's happening. Are you flooding with emotion? Are you feeling adrenaline? Are you panicking? Are you starting to cry? So say to yourself, I'm having an emotional reaction. Because it's just true. You can just say that to yourself. Just ground yourself in reality with that. I'm having an emotional reaction. So another thing you can do is slow down the interaction. Just get it way slowed down. A lot of us are very sensitive to hurrying, and yet once we start panicking, we start rushing. So it sort of compounds itself. So you can just back up, take big pauses between what is said. Take your time to answer, take your time to say things, consider your words, prepare to see things in a new way. Now, a lot of the time, simply slowing things down can reduce the overwhelm. That's all that's needed. Less overwhelm means you can recover your perspective right there and then and experience a little calming effect inside. If you're about to cry and you don't want to cry because you're at work or you're giving a speech or you don't want to be vulnerable in a particular situation, here's a great trick. Imagine that on your stomach, like right below your belly button, that you have a knob, all right? And the knob goes all the way up to 10 or 11 if you like Spinal Tap. If you have emotional dysregulation, it definitely goes to at least 11, all right? So now imagine that the tears are coming because you accidentally left the knob at about 8. So now just in your mind, dial your belly knob just down to 2. Just bring it down to 2. And sometimes that's all that's needed to just stop the tears, control the tears and the sadness. It is like somebody left a gate open or something and the cows are running out. So you just shut the gate or bring it down to 2. You're not cutting off your emotions 100%, but just controlling the opening there. All right, if it's anger that's happening, use what used to be called restraint of pen and tongue. That's a really nice phrase. I use it all the time. It's so helpful to me. And it means don't say anything or write anything, including emails, texts, letters. Don't do it when you're angry. What happens is this venting will escalate your emotional overwhelm and your thinking gets distorted and you might say things you don't actually believe and that you'll regret. And of course, if you've ever had a conflict over text, it never goes well. There's no way to communicate the tenderness or the caring or the listening. It just sounds like somebody snapping, no matter how you handle it. So don't do that. When you're angry, don't write. Instead, because it's important to express yourself, promise yourself that you'll express yourself just a little later when you're calm. You can find a gentle, polite way to postpone any more conversation. You can just say, I really want to have this conversation. It's important to me. I definitely don't want to, get all intense on you. Could I just have 15 minutes so I can, just bring my emotions together? You don't even have to say that if you're at work. You can just say, you know what? I have this other call. I need to go do that. Can I come back and have this conversation with you in 15 minutes? So whether you choose to tell anybody that you're taking time out to emotionally re-regulate or not, people will generally accept that you can continue the conversation later. And whether they realize what was about to happen or not, it's good for everybody for you to show up kind of regulated for all your conversations. It's good for you, it's good for them. If it feels urgent for you to express yourself, that is often a cue that you need to take double time pausing, and getting re-regulated. The sense of urgency is not always reliable with CPTSD. It's basically your old like emergency response kicking in over stuff that's just about communication or saying how you feel. So when it really is an emergency, if you need to pull somebody out of a rushing river, or you're in an abusive situation and you need to get out the door, of course urgency is appropriate. But if it's just about communicating something or trying to talk something through, if you feel urgency, it's very likely going to only benefit if you pause for 30 minutes or an hour or tomorrow. There's very little that has to be solved like in any given day. That's important. So if you can come back regulated in more time, that's really good. Don't underestimate the damage you can do when you try to solve problems when you're dysregulated. It's kind of like driving drunk, okay? All right, another thing you can do some emergency writing. And I'm talking about the daily practice way of writing that I teach. I have a free course. I always link it on the free tools page of my website. The free tools page of my website is always linked down in the description section below. But it's called the daily practice. And I teach a specific technique where you can get your fearful and resentful thoughts on paper, kind of ask for them to be removed, rest your mind. Give it a try. So many of us have had it experience life-changing healing from being able to put our emotions on paper before just kind of throwing them at another person. It often feels, especially if you were neglected as a kid, that what you really, really need is to tell somebody how much they hurt you, because there's this fantasy that if you tell them, then they'll be like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'll come in and I'll care for you and I'll help you feel better. But in adult life, that's usually not how people respond when we come at them like in anger. They don't respond like trying to help us. And if they do, it's probably not coming from a healthy place. But also, it's not realistic that other people can, even if they want to, that they can re-regulate your nervous system. It is an inside job. So we take those feelings to the paper and have a process for relieving them before having the communication. We do need communication, but when it's packed up with like all your unmet childhood needs, it becomes something quite frightening and overwhelming to other people. They're either going to run or they're going to pretend, but it's going to be a disappointment and it's going to hurt your relationship. So paper, that's a suggestion there. What I love about paper, you can do this just about anywhere. In the bathroom, you can do it in the dark of a movie theater, you can do it in the car when you're a passenger, not driving obviously. You can do it in bed in the middle of the night. You can do it at your desk while you're pretending to work. And employers, I'm an employer too. But here's the thing. I'm not saying that you should just fake work and steal time from your employer like that, but sometimes the most efficient way to get productive in your day is to take the overwhelming emotions and just get them out on paper so that you can return your focus back to the task at hand. That's a good thing to do. It's definitely better than having an emotional meltdown too. All right, another thing you can do is get some hard exercise to kind of like rinse all those stress chemicals out of your body. You can run up and down a flight of stairs a couple times if you are physically able to do that. If you can walk, you can take a brisk walk. Whatever you physically can do to get your heart rate up, maybe just break a little bit of a sweat. It just is so powerful to turn around the stress chemicals that are active when you're in emotional dysregulation. And sometimes you can come at emotional dysregulation through reason. Sometimes you have to come at it through physical action. There are a number of ways that you can approach your healing. So I'm giving you a list of them so you can find your favorites. All right, here's one. This is another physical one. You can wash your hands, or in a big pinch, you can take a shower. Wash your hands in cold water, splash it on your face. Everybody does that, right? Sometimes. Or wash your hands in nice, warm, soapy water that feels nice, and just take a minute to feel the water on your hands and the soap and the clean hands and feel how nice that is. You're using these tactile experiences to just sort of come back from this sort of flight away from what's actually happening for your senses right here in the room for you right now. This is called being in your body. And I don't actually believe that people leave their bodies, but that's a metaphor for what happens when our nervous system is starting to shut down, like quadrants of your brain are just going dim, and you're not able to process sensory input from where you are. And that's when you're often vulnerable to outbursts or saying things you don't mean. You want to be in touch with all of your feelings. You want to be in touch with cues. You want to be able to detect danger. Like if you're going up and shouting at somebody on the street, what if they're dangerous? What if they could physically harm you? You need to be tuned in, right? And so that's why physical regulation, neurological regulation goes hand in hand with emotional regulation. So we're learning to master re-regulation of both. It all comes down together, and you begin to be centered in a calm awareness. And you have nice ears to hear what's going on. You have eyes. You have a heart to feel what's going on. And imagine, like, if you could do that, that would change a lot, right? So emotional dysregulation feels to me, and I think a lot of people, a little bit like a trance, like you're hypnotized. You're a little bit out of touch with some things. You're deeply in touch with something else, a feeling. And what you need to develop is to have part of you that can sort of stand outside that situation and go, I see that I'm going into a trance-like dysregulation state. And that part of you that can see it's going on can kind of take you gently by the shoulders and say, hey, come on, Anna. Come on out. Let's get out of this dysregulated state. Let's use some tools. Once you have that part of you that can sort of pull you back a little bit when you notice it's happening, you've just gotten on the path to serious change. That's how you do it. Self-awareness, just enough to pull back. Before you know what to do, before you've solved all your problems, you're just like, okay, this thing is happening. I know it doesn't go well when I, say things and try to solve problems like this. Let me take a beat. All right. If you like, you can talk with somebody who is trustworthy, they understand you, and who's not in that moment in a conflict with you. Very important. Someone else. Sometimes it helps to get an outside perspective. But I don't recommend trying to tell a long story. I don't recommend trying to vent, going into yet another hypnotic trance, and then he did this, and then he did that, and then, have you done that? I've done it. That's bad. That just takes me worse into emotional dysregulation. So the discussion, it doesn't usually work that well when you're already upset. But obviously, sometimes this can't be avoided, and somebody will try to help you and assist you to kind of emotionally calm it. The irony is that one of the hardest things for a person in emotional dysregulation to hear is, can you calm down? Ma'am, please calm down. It's like, whoo, it goes off again. So sometimes it's going to be you by yourself. So one way to check in with yourself when you're having one of those conversations is to ask yourself, is having this conversation making you more dysregulated? Are you feeling more upset? Are you maybe talking faster and faster, louder and louder? Are you talking on top of people? These are signs that you're actually going into dysregulation. So if you can have that part of you stand outside and go, oops, I'm getting more dysregulated. You just find a polite way to say, okay, well, thanks for your help. Now get yourself to a private space with your pen and pencil or your tools, your physical tools, to start bringing yourself back before you begin talking again. Talking is sometimes the gateway drug to more dysregulation, just saying. Sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not. We need to learn the difference, because when we're dysregulated, the person we're getting all dysregulated on will often also dysregulate, and two dysregulated people will often escalate quite badly. You've probably been there. Everything that needs to be said can and should be said, but not necessarily in that moment. If you possibly can, wait until you're regulated, calm, more lucid, able to feel the range of feelings you have about someone, and not just the angry part, not frantically trying to get them to understand something. These steps, by the way, don't just help you regulate emotionally, but they help you re-regulate your brain and in your body, your heart rate, your breathing, your thinking, your coordination of your feet and hands, your ability to focus. So I have a quiz you can take if you want to check some of the symptoms of dysregulation. If you're hearing this and you're like, wait, that happens to me. I got a list of them, and you can check them off on this list. That is in my free tools page too that I mentioned on my website, free tools. The link to the free tools page is down below in the description section. When you're re-regulating your emotions and the intense thoughts keep just fluttering in, just keep reminding yourself to hold the thought and instead focus on next steps, positive actions, positive words. This isn't positive thinking. It's not toxic positivity. This is just redirecting your thoughts when they're sort of going whack to a clearer mental space, because that's part of you too. You have clarity in there. You have a place in there that has less emotional charge, where you can anchor yourself. You can remind yourself that's your home. That's where you go when things get crazy, is into this home inside. You're not suppressing your feelings. You're just postponing expressing your feelings until you're a little more regulated. And contrary to popular belief, by the way, you don't have to talk things out to get regulated. Talking about your feelings, it's important, but there's a time and a place, and sometimes that best time and place is later, when it will be helpful and constructive, and when it will help you have and keep and strengthen relationships with people you love, people you treasure, even though it doesn't feel like that when you're emotionally dysregulated. So when this happens, just keep reminding yourself by silently telling yourself, I'm feeling dysregulated. And then use your tools. Stop venting. Remind yourself that you don't need to express yourself and clear the air right then. Your words will be there. Your feelings will be there waiting for you when you're calmer. You will have access to yourself. You'll be no longer dysregulated. And then when you express yourself, you can do it elegantly and with fairness and love. It'll feel great to keep your relationship gentle like this and to get past the shame of overreactions. And then you can enjoy the way that your connections with other people, rather than getting ruined, begin to get nicer, deeper, stronger over time. People with childhood PTSD, through no fault of their own, can sometimes have overly strong emotional reactions. And if you were abused or neglected as a kid, you know how this goes. Something hurts your feelings. You have a huge oversized reaction to it, and you know it's so big it's going to create problems if you express those feelings to the people around you. So you start working really hard to pretend that it just didn't happen. You either try to shut down your feelings or you run away from the situation. And it would be great if you could get through life this way, just putting up a facade to pretend that you're not overreacting or running away whenever things get awkward. You could just get a new group of friends every week or two, right? And basically just change yourself at will to fit whatever situation is happening, to not be you. That's how your childhood PTSD is trying to make things go, to just stop the consequences of your emotions at any cost. But as we've all learned through bitter experience, life requires something a little smarter than that, something really hard for us. And that's to hang in there sometimes, even though we're having an emotional reaction, so that we can separate out what's real and appropriate and what might be the trauma coloring the way we see things. And there are some people in situations that you do want to push out of your life, but that's for another video. What I'm talking about today is a strategy for you to be aware when your emotional reactions are taking hold of you, and what you can say or do to handle those situations better, to express yourself when you need to, but take care not to push away the good people you appreciate and who you want in your life, okay? So the first emotional reaction that can push people away is that when we're hurt or disappointed, we disappear. And there are a couple ways we do this. One is we pretend we're fine when we're not fine, and then at some later date, we disappear. Or in some cases, we act fine and disappear like all in the same, 5 minutes. But either way, we're pushing people away. So let's take an example. All right, let's say that you and your friend have talked for years about taking a trip together to Mexico. And it was never a firm plan, but it was something that you'd been looking forward to and you assumed it would really happen. And you're eating lunch with your friend just like you do every Thursday, and she tells you, hey, I've got exciting news. I'm going to go to Mexico with my new boyfriend. And it seems like she doesn't remember that you talked with her about that many times, right? Has that ever happened? So you end up saying, oh, great. And you have a choice in that moment to tell her how you actually feel, or because if you have childhood PTSD and you've had some painful experiences telling people when your feelings are hurt, then out of shame and fear, you might just go silent. You might hide. But either way, again, you're going to push them away. And so you feel like that's happening, right? You fear it and you try to prevent it. And so that's what disappearing is. It's an attempt not to damage the relationship, but unfortunately, it's also going to push people away. But here's what disappearing looks like. You're boiling inside. You can't believe she would do this to you and pretend that she had no memory that you two had this loose plan, that you were going to go to Mexico, and you're fighting tears and your heart is pounding and these emotions are coming up. And somewhere inside, you know the plan, it wasn't firm, and she's probably innocent, but there's this other part of you that's about to slide from sad and feeling kind of sucker punched by this news to angry and mean. Fight response, right? Disappear is flight. This is the fight response. And of course, you know what always happens when the mean part comes out. So you don't want to be mean, so you just stay silent. That's freeze, right? And you just sit in awkward silence with your friend, or you fill the silence with chit chat. That could be fawning, right? But actually, you're not there. You're so far away, you're gone. And as soon as you can get out of the lunch, you find an excuse, you get yourself out of there, and you say, bye, really nice. But then comes the long silence, right? Where you avoid, where you ghost them. And when Thursday rolls around again, you tell her, oh, I'm busy. And the next week she texts you to see if you still want to meet up and have lunch, and you ignore her text this time. And the whole time you're thinking, I should just respond. I should just go. I should quit making such a big deal out of this. I'm going to regret this. I got to tell her how I feel. But the later it gets that you haven't answered that text, the weirder you feel that it's going to be when you actually do respond or get together. And that's where the temptation comes to just really flee, to really blow the whole thing off. And now you've really pushed her away. And it might be recoverable, but your friend feels hurt now. So even worse, if she calls you the next day to find out what happened, you don't want to take her call. You don't want to hear how she's hurt. You don't know what to say. Or it's worse than that. You do pick up the phone, and this time you do the second CPTSD emotional reaction that pushes people away, and you release a whole boatload of anger on her. Fight. You start out with I statements and feeling words. You go, well, I just feel like we talked about this, right? But then the conversation just rolls over a couple of logs there, and next thing you know, you're blowing up. You're going into accusations and yelling and talking on top of each other. You were hurt, she was hurt, and then you tried to disappear your feelings so hard that what happened is it came out of you like lava, all right? And you say hurtful things, unfair things. Things you know are only going to damage the relationship, but it just seems in those moments, there's only going to be relief if you can get them said, if you can convince her how hurtful she was. And, she might have been realizing she was inconsiderate by forgetting your plans, but now she just wants to get away, and that wasn't the outcome you wanted. Okay, so let's unpack what just happened here. You were hurt. You tried to disappear instead of talking to her, and then you tried to use anger to get her to recognize your feelings. But all you've got now is someone who wants to put up a wall against you. And she definitely doesn't want to take that trip with you now, right? But if you have a pretty good friendship, then one of you, sooner or later, is going to try to talk things through. And it might even be you who starts it, which I would give you a gold star for. If you're still in the emotional reaction of it, then when you get together for lunch again, even if you start out with kind words and taking responsibility, you're going to end up doing the third thing that pushes friends away. And that's when your expectations of other people to care about your feelings becomes child-sized. And when I say child-sized, I don't mean like this, I mean like this, which is to say enormous. We have these child expectations. And again, this is not your fault. If you were emotionally neglected by your parents when you were little, it is so normal to have these huge outsized expectations from friends and partners later on. There's just this big neglected, empty space inside. And so when something hurts you there, when people make you feel overlooked or excluded, what they get from you is hit with expectations that you rightfully had as a child, but that are totally inappropriate now that you're an adult. And you're laying it on them. And that doesn't feel good for them. Now, as a child, you needed to feel important and treasured and central to your parents' lives, but with adult friends, there's a time to step aside for them, to have other relationships, to go to Mexico with who they want to go with, and it isn't always going to be with you. Now, when you were a kid, if you had to suppress those feelings of abandonment and just soldier on, it has a way of making you kind of squirrely around plans and inclusion. So your friend taking the trip you wanted to take with her, with someone else, which is okay. It's not like you had dates set. It's not like you had tickets. That would be another story. It triggers a lifetime of pain in you, though. It all comes roaring back in your nervous system. You might not even be conscious. You're just feeling awful. You're sad. You were supposed to be cared for. It's so understandable why feeling left out now is intense. But the thing is, for friends, these expectations, and this was part of yourself, even when the emotions are spilling out and sabotaging everything, these expectations are unreasonable. To your friend, it feels like bullying or it feels like you're crazy. And that's how we push people away. You know that up here, you can see that a rift is coming. But down here in your heart, it's like a desperate little kid is driving. It's being a kid all over again. It feels in those moments like there's no way to talk it through. There's no good outcome. And the temptation then is to do the fourth CPTSD thing, and that is to vilify your friend, to justify all the struggles you have with handling the feelings or expressing them or working them out, but just writing her off as a bad person. And we do this in 100 ways, right? You're arrogant. You have no idea what other people go through. You're a narcissist. Your boyfriend sucks. And okay, we could go on and on. We point the hurt out here rather than feeling it in here and working on it here. And that's how we do the fifth CPTSD thing, where our pain causes us to not be able to see people. It sucks us into ourselves. We can't see people. And you know, if you're going to have a good friendship, half of that is you being a good friend. And one key property of good friends is that they are capable of feeling happy for their friend when something good happens. We can't be in some mental mathematical model where any happiness they have with someone else is an insult or it robs us of our due with them. And I chose the example of this vacation that, you know, it's sort of a vaguely planned vacation. And then it was forgotten by the friend with the new boyfriend. And I chose this example because that is inconsiderate and it does hurt, but it's the kind of thing that happens all the time between friends. They don't owe us the care that a parent owes to a child. And they can't actually cheat on us because there's no such promise like there would be in a committed romantic relationship. And yet we react like this sort of thing is happening. A friend is someone you support, who you want the best for, and for whom you give forbearance. You give them a little space to make mistakes or to have a misunderstanding. You would never want to force anyone to take a trip with you, right? It wouldn't be friendship. It wouldn't even be fun. I've been on trips like that. And so the solution in this situation is to be a person who has several friends, who's not relying on one person to be your everything. That way you can take responsibility that you have a dream, you want to take a trip, and if it's not this person, maybe you'll try that person, maybe you'll go by yourself. But you're not going to put responsibility for your happiness on your friend. Now, was she disappointing? Yes. So here's what you might have done earlier in all this, back at that first lunch where she first told you that she was going to Mexico. All right, so your friend says, guess what? New boyfriend and I are going to Mexico. Okay, so just like before, you get a strong emotional reaction. And you grew up and abused and neglected, so that's going to happen. Okay, but here's what you might say. Oh my gosh, that's so great. You must be so excited. Now, you're expressing that you want the best for her, even though you're not feeling it right now. And then you can say, you know, I have to admit, I'm having a bit of an emotional reaction about it right now. And I'm totally happy for you. But for me, I'm kind of crushed. I don't know if you remember, but you and I talked about a trip to Mexico. Do you remember that? And then your friend might go, oh yeah. She probably knew, right? She probably did remember all along. But she'd go, oh yeah, well, I didn't know we had an actual plan. All right, now that's fair, right? And then even if you still feel all your strong emotions, you can speak out of your highest values and know that the way your feelings are going to come back to earth later is going to go better if you can be true to your values now while they're just going crazy. You're not acting directly on your intense feelings. You're acting on your values, that you want to be fair, that you want to be level-headed, that you're going to give yourself time to think about things, to see what you need to express if you need to. It doesn't ever have to be like in this minute. I do think there's a lot to be said for speaking up in the moment. But sometimes as people with childhood PTSD, we need time to kind of think this through. Maybe use our tools to calm the triggers down. Maybe check in with a mentor or a coach or a friend, kind of go, am I being unreasonable here? So in this case, I would just say, you know, I've created an example where it's hurtful, but the right thing to do is to give her your blessing because you can't force her on the trip. And if you want to stay friends, you got to find a way to work with this and be an independent spirit who has several people you could make such a plan with or do it by yourself. Okay, so this is a friend you care about, you want her in your life. And so something you could say is, the way that I feel so bad about this makes me see that I really need a vacation. And I'm going to take some time to figure out how I can do that. It sounds really fun what you're doing. I hope you have a great time. And there it is. It's really graceful. You've been honest. You haven't suppressed your feelings. You haven't squished it down and tried to, obliterate yourself in order to be accepted by somebody. You've said how you feel. You've also been gracious and loving. And if you watch a lot of my videos, you know what I'm going to suggest next, right? Yes, the daily practice techniques, so that you can move some of those strong emotions about the past, about the present, and just keep them processing and moving so that you can feel courageous and optimistic enough to take positive steps in your life. Maybe you don't want to be friends with this person. Maybe that will become clearer. But if your pattern has been to push people away, it's worth a try. To live through your values of wanting to be the best, to operate in the best interest of your friends, and also for yourself. So she has a good life, and you have a good life. And you come together not out of resentful obligation or neediness, but freely, because you both want the best for each other. As you heal your childhood trauma, there will come a time when you're interacting with someone, and for the first time, you notice that something they do triggers you, and you begin to get dysregulated. And in that precious moment, before you've lashed out or emotionally withdrawn or had whatever trauma reaction you tend to do when you're triggered, you do something new. That new choice is a tremendous sign of healing, and it's everything. So if you're still in the phase of early recovery from CPTSD, you've probably suffered again and again with the consequences of your reactions in these moments. You hurt people, you push them away, you blurt things out that make people stop trusting you. Maybe you've lost jobs and relationships because of this. But there's more to healing than just feeling it, talking about it, figuring out what happened in your childhood to cause it. There's an opportunity to do something quite differently that just might open up huge possibilities in your life. My letter today is actually a comment from someone shared in the secret Facebook group where people in my membership program support each other in going through my courses and applying the principles to their lives and celebrating their successes. So with the permission of the person who posted this, but using a pseudonym, I wanted to share with you what she wrote. I call her Camilla. All right. She writes, I'm taking one of your courses right now, Anna, and I have already gotten some insight and a sense of hope that I can heal. I've had messy relationships my whole life, and I'm ready for better. Got the fairy pencil, because I always use that to circle what I want to come back to in a second reading. I had my first conscious trigger with somebody today while on a video call with them. They had interrupted me and did something that made me feel unseen, unimportant, and whatever else I was feeling and all that. I let the trigger happen because in the past, I've pushed it down and just been silently angry at the person. I felt this intense pain in my chest, and I wanted to cry. They noticed the change in me, and I tried to tell them what was going on in a calm way. They don't have the understanding about this stuff. They were supportive, but not really emotionally mature, and they can come off pretty callous at times, which they said so themselves. But I'll give them credit for being there in the moment while it played out. It was about 5 minutes, and I didn't cry until after the call, and the call ended on a good note as I wasn't mad at them, and was more trying to figure out myself out in this. It was so interesting to be so in the moment with a trigger like this. I can see why most of my relationships have been a mess, if I've been operating from such a dysregulated state and upset with everyone for it. I'm wondering what to do in a moment of such an intense trigger. I know by doing the work in the courses, there won't be an issue all the time, but right now it's clearly an issue. I felt so embarrassed by it. Also, is there a way to explain CPTSD triggers and healing to this person, or should I not push this information on them? Thank you for your help. Happy healing to everyone. Thank you. This is so great. All right, Camilla. This is such good work. This is actually such a demonstration of huge healing progress, that you're just sitting there conscious in that moment. When something happens, the trigger comes up and you didn't lash out, you didn't run away, you hung out, and it hurt. And there it is. There it is. Now, this reminds me of, some people talk about mindfulness, and mindfulness all by itself has never been very accessible to me, because if I'm just sitting there observing my feelings and CPTSD is causing my feelings to get really over intense and and I feel like I'm drowning in them, then, just attending to those feelings, it's not really doable. But because in this approach that we're using in the membership program, we're using writing twice a day to start, and as we write twice a day and we do it as needed, to start naming and getting it out of our minds and onto the paper, like, this is what's bothering me, this is what's bothering me. And so when you're in a conversation, you can't always just stop and go, hold on a second, I'm going to write. Sometimes you can, but this is a situation where you were in the middle of the conversation, but because you've been doing it, because you've been learning in the courses about the concept of, we don't always have to express our feelings about everything. We don't have to take our feelings literally all the time. We know that we get, emotional flashbacks, we get huge wells of emotional reaction to things that would really be overwhelming to somebody who had just said something that was hurtful to us, but may not have been intended as anything. Like, our reaction will not make sense to people, even if they have CPTSD. If they're following this approach with you, then they can understand. We have a common language for talking about it. We can say, whoa, I'm getting dysregulated right now, so I need to pause. But you asked, what can you do? And that is the great question, and that is what all of this work here that I teach is about that incredible golden opportunity moment when we go, whoa, there's a trigger, I feel it. And then before we act on it, we have the opportunity to try to intervene on our own behalf, on everybody's behalf, to come out with a different reaction. Sometimes, like, cognitively, you can't put together what to do. And so for the first option that you have is to pause and just to say, hold on a second, you don't even have to tell the other person what's really going on. I'll tell you right now, like, if they're not savvy about CPTSD, I don't really recommend try to, like, make them understand. One day, maybe. But in the moment, you just use, like, common reasons that people have. You just go, oh, hold on a second. And if you have to tell a little white lie, someone's at the door, or I have to go to the bathroom, I'll call you right back. You just buy yourself some time because you need a little extra time to process. And I don't know about you, but when I've been hurt by somebody and the reaction is starting up, I really cannot solve it by talking about it. Not in that moment. I need to pause. One way or another, I need to pause. That's why talk therapy was always so difficult for me, because it's just standard expectation that even if they see you reacting to something and very compassionately say, oh, do you want to talk about what you're feeling right now? Like, that's so normal for a therapist, right? But for the kind of CPTSD I have, that is a challenge that's going to throw me sort of like over a cliff. Talking about it right now, when I'm on the brink of sort of going into full-on dysregulation, it's just too much. So I build a pause into myself. And if I'm with people who can understand what that is, I can use direct, honest language and just say, oh, hold on, I'm on the precipice of getting dysregulated. I'm taking a pause. Just a second, let me pull this together. And if they're not that person, you just make a reason why you get a little time. It could be a minute, it could be 5 minutes, it could be half an hour, it could be a day. But you ask for more time, and you do it in a way that doesn't make them feel insulted, punished, or abandoned. Very important. When you're in the middle of a dysregulated sort of uprising inside, there's a high potential to hurt people. And it's really not in our disposition to simultaneously be able to be very aware of other people's feelings while we're going inside, right? But you have to memorize some techniques to protect other people's feelings. If you need to talk to them about something that's going to be hard for them to hear, you want to do that later when you're re-regulated. And chances are there's nothing you need to tell them that's going to hurt their feelings. You're having a reaction to something. And when you have some time to use your tools, you'll have more perspective. And much of the time, whatever was said, you'll go, okay, all right, I see where they're coming from. And your reaction is over. And then you can return to that conversation or that relationship in a better state. So I related so much, Camilla, when you said that what you used to do is stuff it down and then go into an angry state. And no matter how much we think that we're hiding what's going on inside with some sort of fake, no, I'm fine. I'm actually fine. We have nervous systems. Everybody else has a nervous system, and nervous systems don't lie. People who are sentient can feel when there's anger and tension there, no matter what you're saying on the surface. And so that's why, that's the terrible truth when you start learning to heal. It's like, we're not really fooling anybody. I remember when I used to smoke, I used to go out of my way to like smoke out of sight, wash my hands. And I really thought like nobody could tell I was a smoker, but of course they could. If you're not a smoker, you can always smell when somebody's been smoking. But I didn't realize that until I had stopped smoking and become a non-smoker too. And then I was like, Oh yeah, you can totally smell when people have smoked. And I was so embarrassed, but there's nothing to be ashamed of because now you're free. Now you're free. And that's how it is. When you stuff your feelings down and you're just being fake or trying to be appropriate, I mean, even like what you consider appropriate from your dysregulated state, it might not be. It might be odd. It might be, the telltale sign that somebody's not really being honest about where they're coming from is that nothing can be resolved. So if you can't get a resolution by faking it, it might be your best option to just like get a pause, do your work, and come back to the conversation regulated, with that trigger deactivated for now. And I know like sometimes you resume the conversation of whoop, it comes right back. But a trigger, remember, it's a neurological phenomenon, and it deserves time to just sort of get that back down. That's what we do here. We learn to notice when we're neurologically dysregulated, and we learn to re-regulate as quickly as possible. That is my approach. When you do that and you can start operating in a regulated state, you can start solving life's problems. And let me tell you, if you've been living your life dysregulated after a childhood full of trauma, you have life problems. Everybody has life problems, but CPTSD has a way of really piling them on. And that's a consequence of getting dysregulated, not being able to have honest responses to things, going into a sort of a blank mind state when we're sort of approaching something stressful or dangerous, and not being able to see red flags, not being able to recognize opportunities. We reject good things. We jump into bad things. So there's problems. But these problems, one at a time, you can start to unpack them and solve them and put them back into order. And it feels so good. And how you do that is by learning to re-regulate in the moment, to change your response in the moment, to find a pause for yourself so that you can process that before you carry on and keep talking. That is my secret knowledge about CPTSD that hardly anybody knows. It's not possible for many of us to keep talking when we're in that state. If we continue to talk about how we're feeling, we can be accurate, but it's only going to drive us further into that state where we can't process information, we can't feel connection, we can't feel empathy, we attack ourselves, and it will usually, I won't speak for everybody, but based on like reactions that I've had in that moment when I push myself forward, there's just sort of like a collapse that happens. And whatever that is, whether it's lashing out or I give up, fine, I'll just leave. There's this extreme reaction that comes at the end of a series of reactions if you cannot get that pause and kind of bring your brain and nervous system back online. All right, so you say it's embarrassing. I know, we do embarrassing things, and we're going to just like right now, starting today, have a clean slate. We're just going to understand that we could not have done better because trauma was not our fault. We sustained a neurological injury from abuse and neglect, and that was not our fault. And we are now empowered with information for what to do about it. And we're beginning right now. We're just putting our foot on the trail right now for how we resolve that. So this is a very healthy thing to do. And a lot of people are scared of my approach at first because they think, if I become neutral to my triggers, I'll be defenseless. But you won't be defenseless. You're actually defenseless right now because of the way you abandon yourself in those moments when you're reacting like that. Because when you're having intense rage or you're running away from the situation, like sort of an intense, I'm leaving this situation, forget it. You obviously don't like me, I'm leaving. Like all of that, that's going to create a lot of trauma in your life. It's going to reactivate old wounds that are even deeper than the ones that were already up. And that becomes paralyzing. You've probably noticed. Sometimes, this is what I used to think when this was all going on for me all the time. It still happens occasionally, but I used to think, it's weird because I am not an alcoholic, but I act like one. Like I couldn't go to work the next day after something like that happened. I didn't understand it at the time. But now I understand that I got so dysregulated that I couldn't get back. My whole life changed when I could begin to recognize that was happening. I think that was the second thing that happened. The first thing that happened is I learned how to get re-regulated. I didn't have a word for dysregulation then or re-regulation. I only knew that when I tried these techniques that a friend showed to me, it's a really simple writing technique, a simple meditation technique, as you know, Camilla. When I did that, my mind would just sort of come back together. It would come back from this scattered state. I used to call it like popcorn. My thinking was like pop, 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 pop all over the place. And I would come out of my meditation from this half hour, techniques, set of twin techniques I would use. I would come out of it just, clear-headed, calmer inside. Sometimes sad things were going on or scary things were going on, but I wasn't popcorned over it. I was like, wow, that's really sad. And just like you described, you got off the phone and you cried. There are no techniques that can stop life from being sad, tragic sometimes, frightening, unjust. Like, problems are going to happen as long as there is life on earth. How we meet those problems is everything. How we meet those problems. If we meet them, completely frantic, unreasonable, overreacting, pushing people away, we're only going to make our problems worse. And consequently, when we make our problems worse, there's a ripple effect on other people, on children, on friends, on family, on just the strangers we run into on the sidewalk. We're having this negative impact on the world when we're bringing that. Remember, people are nervous systems, so when you're walking around, dysregulated and in that state, people can feel it. It's a little bit contagious. When you're walking around regulated, when you're walking around with that calm, good feeling that you understand what's happening with you, you accept who you are, you're able to pull yourself back from that and choose your reactions and what you will say about problems, how you would like to solve them with more clarity. It's also contagious. It's contagious even when you're not saying anything. People can feel it. It's calming for others to be around. You could probably think of people in your life where just being around them just feels good. Even on TV, you've heard me talk before about Mr. Rogers, a show that I liked when I was a kid. And I watch him now, and I still get that good feeling from him. Like, he's very regulated. He's imparting regulation through his own calm, focused self-regulation. It feels good to listen to Mr. Rogers for me to this day. And then I get bored because I'm a grown-up and I got stuff to do. But when I was a kid, it was a lifesaver for me. So you have a beneficial healing effect on people around you when you learn to regulate. But this is when the rubber hits the road, is in that moment, that very moment when you're like, there it is, here I go. And so what we do as people who are healing this, we focus on what signs tell me that I'm going in there right now. For me, there's one really obvious sign. My nose gets numb, and sometimes my hands don't work very well. I go, oh, wow. If I'm washing dishes and dropping them, I might be dysregulated before I'm even cognizant of it, because it's not always an emotional feeling right away. Remember, it's your whole nervous system. So it could be changes in your vital signs. It could be changes in your hormones. It could be changes in your sensations, your nerves firing. There's so many signs that it could be. So you start to notice, of the signs that you can actually feel, not all of them can you feel, of the signs you can feel, which ones are going to be your red flags. Oh, it's happening right now. It's happening right now. When you're getting dysregulated like that, that's when it's time to pause. So when you're regulated is a great time to just start planning out in advance. You can use index cards if you have to. Come up with 5 ways that you can create a pause for yourself when you're in an intense situation. Is it when you're driving? Is it when you're at work talking to a customer? Is it when you're trying to solve a problem with your partner? Is it when you're feeling like you really want to isolate and somebody keeps calling you? Like, what are the triggers for you when you do some damage where you can create a pause to be more thoughtful about your response? Now, I never advocate, don't try to be fake, but the reason we have white lies is because we don't want to get into a big debate with somebody. We don't want to have to explain ourselves while dysregulated. We also don't want to drive while dysregulated. So it's like DWD, driving while dysregulated, talking while dysregulated, making decisions while dysregulated. It just doesn't lead to good outcomes. When you're serious about healing, and I know you are, Camilla, what it's all about is creating that space in your life to put your re-regulation skills first, and always be working on that, to put the time in the morning, to put the time in the evening, to take care of yourself physically, because there are so many aspects to re-regulation that are sort of daily practices of, we call it, the daily practice, but things that you do every day. And it involves, sometimes it'll be the way you use your body, moving, getting outside, getting fresh air, connecting with people, not getting too isolated, eating in a way that doesn't throw you out of regulation. Like for me, if I wake up in the morning and I eat a bunch of donuts or something, that would be it. The whole day would be dysregulated. There would be no coming back from that. Alcohol is like that for me. So I can, if I want to, have these things. But there's a price to be paid. That's all. That's all. And so you don't have to swear off or become a saint or anything like that, but you become aware of factors that add up to you not being able to handle life's inevitable stressors and interactions and triggering events, right? You'll hear a loud noise. You'll get a letter in the mail from, this happened to me, the IRS. My accountant says it's a mistake, but it was like this enormous bill from the IRS from the past. And I was like, what is this? And it's not, it turns out it was nothing. But you know what happened when I opened the letter? I just totally flew out of my body. I panicked. I went into a rage. I just like all these reactions. So now I have a good accountant who just goes, no, that's not real. Don't worry. That's a mistake they made. I'll take care of it. You just send it to me. And it was like, yay, that's what I like. So you hear me a lot talking in the last few months about the IRS because they were scaring me. And it was a mistake. That's part of my healing, actually, is I try to just be real. I try to be really honest, careful, responsible, get things done on time. And so, getting hit out of the blue with stuff like that, I don't like. But see, that's part of my CPTSD. I grew up in an environment where stuff like that was never taken care of. There was always sort of this sense of danger, like anything could happen, the bills weren't paid, the electricity or the water could be shut off, and you didn't know where it was coming from. So it's kind of like a overreaction of mine to need everything to be in control all the time and to get freaked out when, something appears to have gone out of control. But here's the fact, you cannot control life. Recently we had a pandemic. Could any of us control what was happening with that? Not really. Not really, not the way the rules came down about it or the requirements or the shutdowns. All of that was happening and all of us were sort of dealing with it with our nervous system in the way we deal with it. Some people one way, some people in another, not trying to open up a debate about that, but just saying like life went out of control. And that's not the last time that's ever going to happen. There's just, stuff happens. When you are regulated and when you can get re-regulated quickly and stay regulated more of the time, day after day after day, this wonderful thing starts to happen, is you go from being a person who's defined by your difficulties to somebody who's defined by who you really are. Who you really are and what you have to bring. And I'll tell you, when difficulties happen in the world, it's the people who have strong principles, strong nervous systems, strong abilities to look at reality and respond to it in a good way. Those are the people who become what we call pillars. The pillars of society, the strong people who can sort of hold the ceiling up for others who may be in a tough place right now and, can't respond well or don't have the means to respond well. It is a great joy. It's really like what we're all encoded with is a desire, a need to become pillars. We're all meant for that. The tragedy of trauma is that it gets broken, it gets messed up. We can't access it. We don't know what it is. And then we get a bunch of like oddball information about what you're supposed to do about it. And I don't think all of that is correct. So I would just put forward to you that when you learn to recognize when you're getting dysregulated, to know that it's a thing, to introduce a polite and considerate way to create a pause for yourself to get re-regulated before you continue. It doesn't matter what your life philosophy is. It doesn't matter what country you're in. Like, this is just solid, common sense way to get through life, to improve your response to life and to become stronger and more supportive of other people and able to have choices in your life. It's a very positive thing. It's the opposite of chaos.